just a couple weeks ago, they had their oral arguments about Grants Pass versus Jonhnson, which is basically a case that would we'd have this, very minimal protections for homeless people that are held in the like liberal Ninth Circuit, which is like Oregon, California, etc. We see what California and Oregon are still able to do, even with these minimal protections. But the protections basically say you can't throw someone in jail or, hand them an outrageous fine just for sleeping outside without the like offer for shelter, without somewhere for them to go. And basically the Supreme Court is ruling whether or not that's fair.
Right. And Grants Pass, excuse me, I was like getting up on this. So this is a place outside of Oregon, or in Oregon, that is a place that a lot of unhoused people camp. And Jonhnson were residents of this encampment, and Grants Pass like residents and the city are trying to basically evict them, and there's nowhere to go. There's no shelters for them. And so, but the Ninth Circuit Court has ruled that you can't, like, all of the draconian things that Grants Pass wants to implement to criminalize that population, to sweep them to this and that, that's sort of like there's an injunction to hold those laws from going forward. Do I kind of have that right, even though I got the name of the case wrong? Rowan?
Yeah. So Grants Pass is a town in like the real conservative part of Oregon. There's 40,000 people there and about 600 homeless folks. And you'll see people write that Grants Pass doesn't have an emergency shelter. That's what the Ninth Circuit decided, because the one shelter that it does have is fucking insane. If you want to stay in the shelter, you can't have sex, you can't do any drugs, including nicotine or alcohol. You have to go to two church services every day, and you have to perform unpaid work for the shelter.
What? Wait, I missed that part. I heard the rest. That's fucking insane.
So the Ninth Circuit was like, okay, that actually doesn't count as shelter. That's not like adequate shelter. So you don't have any shelter. And Grants Pass was like, what they wanted to do is they passed all these laws, which basically said they defined camping as like sleeping outside with a blanket, or if you take your jacket and like scrunch it up and use it as a pillow, if you're like lying down on the beach, you're like going against the law. That's illegal camping. And then they basically said that you couldn't do that anywhere. No public land, no under bridges, no private land, obviously. So basically it's impossible to be homeless in Grants Pass, and there's nowhere to go. So then you have these people, invisible people, went and interviewed a bunch of folks there a few months ago. There are people who, one woman said in the 18 months since they passed these ordinances, she's received $300 tickets. It's technically $295 if you want to be like real. But yeah, so what's that, like $9,000 in tickets, mental maths, hoping that's right, just for like existing in her tent on the street, or I think she's in a park. But
and the original plaintiff in Jonhnson died with like thousands of dollars of tickets unpaid.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, no, and what I mean, to say nothing of the hostility from residents, as I've been reading, residents like going over and like throwing out people's things and harassing them, but then the cops like pouring ice water on ice buckets on top of people's belongings and things like that, just to like, trying to make it, according to Grants Pass, they like, what they say, the word uncomfortable. They want to make being homeless uncomfortable. Like, bitch, sleep outside one night and you'll see how uncomfortable it is. It's like, by definition, being homeless is uncomfortable. You don't have to make it more so for these folks. But they are arguing for their, basically, that their Eighth Amendment rights are being violated by all of these new laws and the criminalization, because it's cruel and unusual punishment. And that homelessness effectively isn't a choice, that these are things they cannot control. And so criminalizing them is obviously violating the Eighth Amendment. But Paige, what's before the Supreme Court, should they choose to take it up, is effectively whether or not being homeless is a choice, whether or not there's a violation there, as so many right-wingers believe, and even just, uppity property owners believe that it is a choice. But can you explain? You started to, and maybe I cut you off.
Oh, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, as often the Supreme Court is doing in choosing to take up a case, there's like more under the surface, right? So as Francesca talked about, there's the idea of status versus conduct. So conduct is like something that you do, status is something that you are. So if the Supreme Court rules like overturns this case and rules in favor of the city, right? That means that mere like status can be criminalized. So the not in effect like not the act of being homeless, but like the status of being homeless, which would also open the door to all sorts of like thought crimes, allow states to effectively banish entire types of people based on status, and we know how dangerous that could be.
Sure. But I mean, is there a world in which even if they like don't take, or they sort of uphold Grants Pass and everything they want to do, that it doesn't really matter if you criminalize the state of being homeless or because the activity of being homeless requires things like camping outdoors or utilizing public water to wash, or like all of the activity that homeless folks participate in because of they are like, that's already being criminalized. So it's kind of like, what's the does it, or do you feel like it would be a massive departure if they were to throw it out completely and allow Grants Pass and all their legislation to go forward and the injunction to fall away?
Paige, you can weigh in on this, but like the lived reality of homeless folks might not change significantly, especially in places without other protections. But the sort of fundamental question of does the Constitution protect homeless people? Saying no to that, I think, is a massive ideological shift, which, as Paige suggested, can open the door to even more sort of horrific policies being put into place, which, just to like reiterate, do not work in reducing homelessness. They cost more money and they achieve worse results. So it's
all of this is just a massive handout. We're going to talk about private equity firms. Like, all this is just a massive handout to like the prison industry that is like very much there's money to be made.
One of the things that drives me crazy about this is that there are people that will see this and they won't care because they won't think it affects them. They won't think that it affects them. I got news for anyone who says that. You don't choose to be homeless, and oftentimes you don't know that you are about to be. Like, people don't realize how quick it happens. I've been unhoused multiple times in my life, in my childhood, in my adulthood. And one of them was precipitated by relapse. So you can have a job, you can think everything's fine, you don't have a savings, and one thing like a relapse or your spouse relapsing or something like that can spiral into homelessness where you have nowhere to go and you are looking around trying to get yourself in a shelter, as I was. So people need to understand that this is going to affect you or could affect you, whether you think it's going to or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up. I mean, I think one of the people that I saw interviewed who lives at Grants Pass, her husband died. And so, what was she to do? And she thought she was going to be able to make rent and couldn't. And then, all of a sudden had to be outside. But Paige, is there anything, I mean, I think that's an incredible point, Rowan, that you made in terms of like, does the Constitution apply to people who don't have homes or what the hell? Or like, because there's part of me that's like, if we don't do anything about the housing crisis, it's not just gonna be the most vulnerable folks who are unhoused. It's just gonna be young people. Like, you know what I mean? Just like the amount of young people that will be unprotected because of this housing crisis and how expensive rent is. I mean, I don't know. It's getting a lot worse.
Yeah, I think that people misunderstand like what the face of homelessness looks like oftentimes. Like, it looks a lot more like the people in this room than like and like young people and queer people than like some imagined scary violent criminal, right? It's like it looks, and I think that like there's something about American grindset mindset that like people really believe that they will be a billionaire before they believe that they'll be homeless. When in reality, most people are like one paycheck away from that happening. There's some stat about Americans only having like, $2,000 in savings or something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and a lot of this ties back to, I think, look, we're at the like 4th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. It ties back to the police and the role of the cops. And when you read these stories about cops, like half their job is just bullying the unhoused. It's like, what the fuck are we doing? It's not only that our taxpayer dollars or communities are investing in prisons, which, as you mentioned, Rowan, the stats are just like so much more expensive to lock people up than it is to make housing affordable. And yeah. And so, but like going back to like, yeah, what the fuck are the cops for? And, it really is about, protecting money and property owners. What's next, guys? Like, what happens? Like, does Kentucky's law, Safer Kentucky and the Cicero Institute, does that just like fan out? Are there other states that have passed this similarly, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there are a handful of states that have passed Cicero's model legislation. I don't necessarily think this is a Cicero project, but I know that Florida will enact basically an anti-homelessness law in October. That'll go into effect in October. Safer Kentucky's goes into effect in July. And then the Supreme Court will rule on Grants Pass v. Jonhnson in like late June, early July when they release decisions. And so basically, regardless of what the court determines, which we know what they'll say, right? They'll rule on at least ideological lines and, would love to criminalize homeless people. Just taking the case opens up just like a vacuum of cruelty and of basically giving other states the go ahead to start passing stuff like the Safer Kentucky Act and to criminalize sleeping on the street.
Right. Absolutely. Because like you mentioned, they are lifting up these cases that have already been decided. They're trying to overrule these injunctions that have already been placed because they're on an ideological trajectory here. Rowan, any final thoughts on this?
I just want to mention one thing which might be a little insight into what our world could look like post the Supreme Court ruling, which is there were a bunch of Californian cities and state officials who petitioned the Supreme Court to rule in favor of Grants Pass. Mm-hmm. Democrat, Republican, crossed ideological lines. And there was one group which made Paige and I laugh, which was a group of 13 California cities. And their petition was that actually the Ninth Circuit's ruling, which said, as a reminder, you can't actually punish homeless people for being on the street if they have nowhere else to go. They argued that ruling was actually cruel and unusual punishment against housed people because it forced them to encounter homeless people on the street. So who knows? Maybe, you know what? Someone's got to stick up for the rights of housed people. And it looks like we're going to be entering that era. Finally.
But that's what it is. I mean, this is what people who have never experienced what Blakely you've experienced. That's what they think that being unhoused is. It's an offense to me to have to see it, to have to interact with it, and which is just so fucking wild. Barb on over here in the super chat says indentured servitude is likely to make a comeback as homelessness becomes illegal. Like that seems
for real.
But for real, that seems like a ridiculous thing to say, but not really if you're like, you can be on this property if you work the garden, but I'll only pay you 2 pennies. Like, wait, this is fucking where we're at.
It's so crazy. And it's like, I just want to say too what Paige said, that really I was like, yes, that's correct. People think that the face of being unhoused looks a certain way and is a certain way. They're the same people that think somebody can't be poor because they have a cell phone. Like, it's just delusional. Like, yes, you can. And there are many people who you would not think, because they won't tell you, that are unhoused, that are working full-time jobs and living in their car.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, oh my God. They are not unemployed. Again, personal anecdote, but it's whatever. Like, watching a man, I remember in SF, living under this bridge, and I just watched him, like, as I was in traffic, like, sweep his tent. He was just like sweeping because it was dirty, obviously. And he had a cat, and I I love a cat story. And he just has this cat, like, and the cat's like patiently waiting outside the tent on a leash as he's like cleaning his tent. He clearly like, and it's just like that humanity, that like, I have a pet. I literally live here. I probably work not so far away, but San Francisco rent is too fucking inaccessible to actually, you know, live near where I work. These are folks who have jobs. They have jobs. They're just not jobs that compensate them well enough.
Yeah, and we know that London Breed sent texts to the police to like sweep homeless people from like areas where she wanted to have lunch. You know, I love
this bitch
one.
goes to a park, is like, ew, gross. Text the fucking SFPD.
And
to
lastly,
sweep them. Oh my god, the shame.
And just on that point of like, yeah, like what Project 2025 vibes, you know, what could this look like? You know, the Cicero Institute has said that their solution to mass incarceration is a competitive market-based reward systems for private prisons. They've said that part out loud.
What? A competitive rewards-based system for private prisons?
Which would encourage innovation in techniques to reduce recidivism. And so private prisons, Joe Lonsdale of the Cicero Institute said, could be rewarded with money and new inmates to replace the old inmates who will not return to prison. So yeah, they're just trying to...
Unless we need a little bit of a pay bump, unless our shareholders are pissed, and in which case we'll arrest them for literally anything and put them back. That's fucking sick. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuationroom. Do it.